So we're in an interesting position with these next two games. These two games in particular. And we're only going to be talking about one of them right here in this video, and then the other one is going to be another video. But these two games, specifically this game that we're talking about right now, Resident Evil 5, you either really love this game or you don't. There's really no in between. Like, the most in between that you're going to get is probably what you're going to hear in this video right now. Other than that, you either love this game and you have fond memories of it, or you really dislike this game. Most people who like this game, who really love this game, are in the camp that they probably started playing Resident Evil with Resident Evil 4. And there's nothing wrong with that. I want to premise that there's nothing wrong with that. If Resident Evil 4 was your first Resident Evil game, that is awesome and it's fine. And I'm glad that you loved Resident Evil 4 and I'm glad that you loved Resident Evil 5. And I'm not going to tell you otherwise, and I'm not here to tell you why you should not like Resident Evil 5, and I'm not here to tell you why you should like Resident Evil 5. I'm here to talk about this game and to give my, let's say, objective and subjective thoughts on this game, because it's both. I look at games and I try to be as objective as possible, but then, some subjective thoughts and comments are going to come through, and that's just how reviews work. I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect subjective or objective review. So, with that being said, welcome back to my Resident Evil retrospective. Today we're tackling Resident Evil 5.
Resident Evil Retrospective.
So Resident Evil 5 went through a couple changes, and it wasn't as drastic of changes as Resident Evil 4 was. Resident Evil 4, it's very well known throughout the community that there were various different renditions of Resident Evil 4. Some of them turned into other games entirely, like Devil May Cry and Haunting Grounds. But Resident Evil 5 is one of these games that it continues the trend that Resident Evil 4 started, which leaned much, much heavier on action as opposed to the original games, which leaned more on survival. With the exception of Resident Evil 3, Resident Evil 3 was kind of in my opinion, it was a good blend and a good balance between being a survival horror game and mixing in the action. Because, I mean, the premise of that game called for it to be a little bit more heavy on the action, so that was understandable. Resident Evil 5, this one's kind of weird for me. I don't necessarily hate it. I don't like the game. I'm just telling you right now, I don't like the game. But I don't hate it either. And that's for good reason. And some of these reasons are going to be stated in this video. So make sure you guys are hitting that thumbs up. Subscribe if you guys are new. And, grab a bucket of popcorn, because this might be a little bit of a long one. Resident Evil 5, I played it way back when it released. And this game kind of has an unfortunate side effect of things. You see, right before this game, they released a small game, let's say, a small unknown game. I don't know if you guys heard of this one, called Dead Space. And Dead Space released right before, I think the year before Resident Evil 5 did. And in comparison, if you play Resident Evil 5 after playing Dead Space, there's something wrong there. There's something feels off, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that Dead Space is a massive improvement compared to what Resident Evil 5 is. And Resident Evil 5 seems like a downgrade from what Dead Space accomplished. Big time. And that goes into a lot of the gameplay mechanics, that goes into the horror mechanics, that goes into the AI mechanics. Everything is a downgrade if you go from Dead Space to Resident Evil 5. And, I know that it's not an exact apples to apples, oranges to oranges comparison, because they're two different franchises, two different companies. But at that same time, Resident Evil, or Capcom, has been at this for many, many years. And Resident Evil 5's gameplay mechanics feel like even a step down from Resident Evil 4. And it's very weird. So let's look at this game and talk about the gameplay mechanics, and then I'll explain why I feel that way. Because story-wise, Resident Evil 5 is probably one of the better games that's in the Resident Evil series. The game gives a lot more lore than any other Resident Evil game does. So we'll talk about that in just a second here, but I want to talk about the gameplay mechanics themselves because that is one of the biggest gripes I have with this game. Resident Evil 4 started the over-the-shoulder perspective for a lot of games. There was a lot of games that released that were inspired by Resident Evil 4, and Dead Space was one of those games as well. And with the over-the-shoulder craze and all these games now shifting to that formula with the over-the-shoulder perspective and zooming in on the camera a little bit when you aim, this game does all of that, and that's fine. But what it doesn't do is improve on the actual mechanic itself. So in Resident Evil 4 was essentially tank controls. It was the same tank controls that we've had for many, many years. Up on the D-pad is forward, down is backwards, left and right moves you left and right. It's the same mechanics that's always been there. And then when you aim, you cannot move your character. You can't move Leon. Resident Evil 5 continues that trend. When you're aiming, you cannot move. You're still tank controls in Resident Evil 5. Forward is forward, back is back, left and right. Same deal. You cannot move. And I have a gripe with that because when you have a game like Dead Space that actually allows you to move while aiming, that's a big deal. And we're talking about a game, again, that released a year before Resident Evil 5 did. So when Resident Evil 5 comes out and you have played Dead Space and you can't move your character, Leon or Sheva or Jill or whatever, in Resident Evil 5, it feels weird. It's a very weird feeling, at least. That's how I feel. And to me, that is a big deal because Resident Evil 5 ramps up the action compared to Resident Evil 4. It throws a lot more enemies at you in small, tight spaces. So because it does that, not being able to move while aiming, oh my God, it is such a downgrade to what could potentially be a very fun action shooter. But again, Dead Space does this. It'll throw you in tight quarters with necromorphs and all that stuff, and you can move while shooting, so you can kind of, duck and dodge through the necromorphs attacks. But in Resident Evil 5, you can't do that. If you want to get out of harm's way, you need to stop aiming and run. And that's not a mechanic that I enjoy. So that's one of the things here that this game just fails to improve on when it comes to Resident Evil 4. The other thing, too, is inventory management. Resident Evil 4's inventory management fit that game. It fit it very, very well. You were able to expand the inventory as you progressed through the game. You were able to combine items and organize your inventory however you wanted to be able to basically play Tetris. Resident Evil 5 tries to go back to a very, very small limited inventory that you saw in Resident Evil 1, 2, and 3, but it fails to do that because this is not a survival game, and it's trying to put survival mechanics into an action game. So that's why this is a problem for this game. This is a very big problem for this game. And again, it hinders what could be a very fun action shooter. And I'm going to keep saying that because this is going to be a continuing trend with this game. And yes, it's a little disappointing because in Resident Evil 5, your inventory is limited to Chris's inventory slots and Sheva's inventory slots. You both have 19 slots of inventory. Every item takes up one slot. Where Resident Evil 4 didn't do it that way. So you had a grid a grid inventory, and smaller items took up less space, larger items took up more space. And it worked because one of my complaints had always been in the Resident Evil games, why does a key take up the same amount of space as a handgun? So Resident Evil 4 decided to fix that problem and make it so small items like eggs only take up one spot, one little block in that grid, where a handgun will take up 6 or 7 or 8. No, not 7, but 6 or 8. Resident Evil 5 goes back to that 1. An herb takes 1 space, a shotgun takes 1 space. Everything takes 1 space in your inventory. And that is a problem because, again, this is a shooter game. This is an action game. It's not a survival game. When enemies drop items, like they do in Resident Evil 4 and 5, it is no longer a survival game because you're not limited to inventory, or you're not limited to the items that you could collect. So this game, the developers decided they wanted to try and adjust that, so to speak, and make it so the inventory is limited regardless of how many items you can find. Your inventory is limited. And again, that's a hindrance to this game because enemies are dropping ammo. You can't pick up any more. And, you just, it's frustrating, especially when you have an AI, such as Sheva's AI, which we'll get to in a minute, that seems to just waste items. Resident Evil 5 is one of these games that if they would have taken a little bit more time to look at the previous game, then they would have been able to improve on a lot of things from that previous game. One of the things about sequels is sequels are supposed to improve on the prior game. Doesn't necessarily mean they need to improve on every single little thing, but they need to improve on the prior game. This game doesn't do that. Yes, sequels also need to continue the story. This game does that, but this game does it in a very good way, which that's why we're going to talk about the lore separately. But as far as the gameplay mechanics from Resident Evil 4 to Resident Evil 5, there is very little change. You still have the same button prompts that there was with Leon. You still have the same button prompts, following up a downed enemy or whatever, a stunned enemy. All of those are there from Resident Evil 4 to Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 5 ramps up the QTEs, which I hate QTEs. Resident Evil 5 ramps up QTEs tremendously from Resident Evil 4. So that's a downgrade in my eyes. If you like QTEs, fine. I hate them. They're invasive. They're annoying. I can't stand them. And don't get me started on Resident Evil 6. We'll get there when we get there. So right now, it sounds like I'm really hating this game, but I don't hate it. Like I said, I don't. I think it's one of these games that should have improved on a lot of different spots, but just failed to do so. Sheva's AI is another point of contention for me. Her AI it's bad. There's no other way to say it. It's bad. It's very annoying. If you give her ammo, she wastes it. If you give her healing items, she wastes them. She serves no purpose as an AI character other than just to annoy you. If she dies, game's over. I don't like that. I don't like the way that this game plays it out with the partner mechanic. If you played this game with somebody else, more power to you, because this game is actually a very good co-op game. Unfortunately for me, I didn't play this with anybody. I played it by myself. And because I played it by myself, I don't have that same enjoyment that people do who play this game with their brothers or friends or whatever. I didn't have anybody to play this game with. So I played it, and the AI just made my whole entire existence worse. Especially towards the end when you're fighting Wesker. Did I mention there's spoilers? There's spoilers in this. I mean, listen, if you're watching this video, odds are you already played this game and you already know everything about it. So you're just watching it to get some random person's opinion on this game that you really like. And that's awesome. I appreciate you, by the way. So her AI, to me, is a hindrance to this game. And I wish there was a way to do it where it would give you the option to play, without her AI and with her AI. I really wish This was the thing. This same mechanic continues in RE6. We're not gonna get there. RE4, yeah, Ashley was annoying, but at least it was just Leon. This game just does not. It doesn't. Oh, it doesn't do it better. It does it so much worse. Because, like, Ashley was annoying. Yes, she was very annoying. Leon, help! I get it. Ashley's annoying. But Sheva. Oh, Sheva. I mean, oh, man. I love Sheva. I think she's a great character. But that AI is so trash. Absolutely trash. Yeah, it's rough. It's rough. I can't tell you how many times I've died or gotten a game over because of her AI. So the solution to that is to not give her any items. Don't give her a gun. All you do is give her a stun baton and make her carry your ammo. And then she can never waste your ammo because she can't use it. She doesn't have a gun to use it with. That is the best way to handle that AI. That's not how a game should be. Especially a game like this where you have a partner character. That's not how it should be. But again, you didn't need a partner. Like, if they would have done a partner character like Last of Us, oh, that would have been great. But Last of Us didn't come out until 2013. So this game, coming out in 2009, yeah, there wasn't going to be a way for them to. Imagine, though, if they would have done it like Last of Us, how much better this game would have been. I don't know. I know a lot of people are hoping for a remake for this game. If they do a remake for this game, God, I hope that they don't. But if they do a remake for this game, then hopefully in that said remake, they would do the AI or the partner character like Last of Us. That would be perfect because they're not intrusive. You don't have to worry about them. You don't have to worry about them wasting ammo or anything like that. So this game definitely needs improvement in a lot of different areas. And that right there, you can tell from everything that I've just said up to this point, you can tell that I've had some disdain for this game. Like the game kind of left a bad taste in my mouth. But it has some glimmers of hope. So these glimmers of hope, let's talk about it, because I think I've been negative enough about this game to the point that you're probably like, oh my God, if he says one more negative thing about this game, then I'm going to stop watching it. But I'm here to tell you there are good things about this game that I do want to talk about. And unfortunately, there is still one more bad thing, one more negative thing, but we're going to talk about the good things first because the good things lead into that one negative thing that's still lingering. Good things about this game. The story is great. I think the story is a good continuation from Resident Evil 4 and the original trilogy. Because we have Jill again. And if you haven't played Revelations released after Resident Evil 5, but Revelations was a transition into Resident Evil 5. But Resident Evil 5 continues from, taking Revelations aside, it continues from Umbrella Chronicles. If you haven't played Umbrella Chronicles, you should. That's one game I wish they would re-release. Especially because we have the Switch, and the Switch can do like motion controls and all that stuff. Anyways, if you haven't played Umbrella Chronicles, the way that they did Umbrella Chronicles was at the end of Umbrella Chronicles. Jill and Chris go invade Umbrella in Europe because they're looking for Spencer. They don't find him, but it leads them to Resident Evil 5, where in the beginning of Resident Evil 5, they do find him. And we have like one of the coolest moments in this game, or in Resident Evil, just period, which is Jill and Chris versus Wesker. And you just see Wesker's full-on force of his power, how fast he is, how strong he is, everything. How scary of a character he is. And that is fantastic. This is the Wesker that we started to like in Code Veronica, that everybody's like, oh my God, Wesker's so cool. And then this game basically cemented the coolness that is Wesker. Unfortunately, though, this is the last game that we see Wesker. And it's very disappointing the way that it goes through. But this game goes all the way back. The story, as you progress through the story goes all the way back to Resident Evil Zero with the progenitor virus. It tells the origin story of the virus, which has now been retconned for Resident Evil Village. But it tells the origin story of the progenitor virus and everything that Spencer had been researching with the flowers that they find in Resident Evil 5. Again, retcon in Village, which we'll get to when we get there. So these flowers were the basis of what became the progenitor virus, then the T virus, then the G virus, then, well, then we get the C virus in Resident Evil 6. Oh boy! If you can't tell, I'm drinking while we're doing this video. So we have in this one the Ouroboros. That's a mouthful. They couldn't think of a simpler name for this. We're gonna call it the U virus. The U virus is a continuation from the Las Plagas from RE4. Ada had gotten a sample of Las Plagas and delivered it to Wesker, and Wesker then started creating the U virus, using Jill as his test subject for a whole bunch of different things. See, Wesker, since he infected himself at the end of Resident Evil, the first Resident Evil, more like Resident Evil Remake is where he infected himself. Anyways, Wesker infected himself, and that's how he became the powerful humanoid tyrant that he is. And unfortunately for him, he is degrading. So the virus is finally taking effect to a point that it's trying to mutate his body. And in order for him to do that, he needed to find a way to use antibodies to counteract the effects. Well, perfect for him, his encounter with Chris and Jill gave him the perfect subject, which was Jill, as Jill knocked him out of the window, falling seemingly to her death, but they never found a body. Well, Jill became Wesker's test subject. And for the next few years, Wesker poked and prodded and tested on her because she had the antibodies for the T virus due to her infection in Resident Evil 3. So using everything that he's found, he managed to find a serum that allowed him to counteract the effects of his virus that he has, which he has to periodically inject himself with. Unfortunately, again, for him. This is something that he's been trying to find a way to make a permanent solution, which led him to the Ouroboros virus, or the U virus, or whatever, infection. And this infection, again, came from the Las Plagas combination with whatever else he was experimenting with. And the fact that this game brings it all back to the original games is why the lore of this game is one of the best and most important for the franchise. And for, like, throughout all the games, this game is the one that explains most of the lore for all the games, especially if you haven't been keeping up with all the little notes that you find throughout all the games. And it's kind of a good refresher for those who haven't played the series in a long time, and it's good for those who just joined in from Resident Evil 4. So that's why this game has some shiny moments, and that is one of them. That is the biggest one, honestly, is the lore that this game brings to the table. The game, though, this is where we're going to get a little negative again. The game itself is a little long. It's longer than RE4. RE4 clocks in anywhere between 9 to 12 hours on a first playthrough. You can get it down to like 6 to 9. But RE5, this game is anywhere between 12 to 15 hours easy. And to get it lower than that is pretty rough, all things considered. You can rush through this game and you'll still get it down to like 10 to 12 hours. So it is a rough game to go through because there are a lot of moments that just drag on. And it's unfortunate. The other downside is the way that Wesker's handled towards the end. Wesker throughout most of this game is a very scary threat. From the beginning of the game when he's introduced and you see him fighting Jill and Chris, to then later on when you're fighting him with when he's controlling Jill, so it's just him and Jill. He's very scary there, as well as towards almost the end in the airport section. Like he's just a monster. But then we get to the end of the game, and he finally mutates with the Ouroboros, and everything gets stripped away. He's no longer fast. He's very slow. He is a one-hit kill, but he's very slow, and he's just he's not scary anymore. What made him scary was that he looked like a person, but he had superhuman abilities. That's what made him scary. That's what made him terrifying. And they stripped all of that away and made him mutate, and that's just not what does it anymore. And the other thing too is that he dies in the most anticlimactic way, falling into a volcano and being shot with RPGs. I mean, this is Wesker. This has been the main antagonist for many, many games at this point, and this is how he goes out. I don't like this. I've never liked this. There's no redeeming that. There's no way to say that there is any good out of that because, again, this has been a terrifying threat through many games, and this is how he goes out. This game has two DLCs that one is fantastic and the other one is just more of the same. Towards the end of the game, when you free Jill of her mind control, basically she tells Chris and Sheva to go finish it and go handle everything. And one of the DLCs, this one sees Jill's escape with her own partner character, which is Sheva's friend. I forgot his name, to be honest with you. And that's fine. It's okay. Like, it's just more of the action stuff, and it's pretty short. The other DLC, well, that actually warrants its own video. That's, to me, that's how important that DLC is. And it almost feels like a different game. So Resident Evil 5 as a game is, I can see what they were trying to do with it. I really can. And I can appreciate what they were trying to do with it. And I mentioned I appreciate the fact that this game is one of the best for lore. But the problems are very in your face. For me anyways. Again, it just depends on when you came into this series, when you came into this franchise. Because again, if you came into Resident Evil with RE4, I can't speak today. If you came in with RE4, RE5 is right up your alley. It's more of what you enjoyed. But if you were a longtime fan from the original series, like myself, well, this game is gonna be a little weird for you, or it might be. I mean, most of the people that I've spoken to have been longtime fans, and when they get to Resident Evil 4 and 5, they're like, I don't know. They might love Resident Evil 4, but then when they get to 5, it's just straight up action, and it seems to have lost most of its identity from what we were used to. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for changing things up. I'm all um, for improving or going with the times. But it's going to take Resident Evil a while before they can go back to what we enjoyed, which is the horror aspects. And when I say it's going to take them a while, well, I mean a while from this game. Because it wasn't really until Revelations 2 that we started getting more into horror. Yeah, Revelations 1 did that a little bit, but it was a weird balance, and we'll get to that game when we get there. But Revelations 2 started going back to that horror, and then finally Resident Evil 7 brought it full on back to that horror Metroidvania style that we were used to. This game, so much in the same vein as RE4, continues that chapter formula where each segment is just a linear segment that you can explore, but there's not much to explore. And you just go segment to segment as you progress through the game. Again, very much like RE4, but very different from the original formula that was Resident Evil 0, 1, 2, 3 Remake and Code Veronica. So that's why this game is a mixed bag for me. I don't hate it, but I don't love it. I don't even like it, but I don't hate it. I'm very neutral for this game. I said at the beginning of the video, I'm saying it here. If you enjoy this game, that is awesome. More power to you. I'm happy for you. I am glad that you enjoyed this game because this was one of Capcom's best-selling games for the longest time. But at the same time, people want to argue with me, saying that, oh yeah, Resident Evil 5 is the best-selling Resident Evil game. Look how long the game's been out for at this point. See, this game has been out for a very, very long time compared to a lot of other games, right? So this game, as of this video, has sold about 13.5 million copies. That includes every port that this game has. And that's since 2009. But you want to make a comparison, a proper comparison. A proper comparison would be like Resident Evil 7. Resident Evil 7 came out in 2017 and is released, or has sold, over 11 million copies since 2017. Resident Evil 2 Remake has sold over 10 million copies. And that's all these numbers are updated since September 30th of 2022. So, yeah, of course Resident Evil 5 is going to be one of Capcom's best-selling games, but over a span of well over 10 years, yeah, I can see why. At the same time, though, a lot of people have enjoyed it. And again, more power to you. I'm glad that you enjoy the game. I really am. There's games that I enjoy that people don't like. And we'll get to that one too, because one of those is on this list. So, I want to thank you guys for watching. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down below in the comment section. I know this was a little bit longer than my last video, but I can't help it because this video, or this game in particular, has a lot of things that we need to talk about. That's why there's going to be a second part to this, specifically on the Lost and Nightmares DLC. Because the Lost and Nightmares DLC, I have a lot to say about that. And this brought us into the DLC era. They're like, I'm glad that RE6 doesn't have DLC. I'm not happy that Resident Evil 7 has DLC. I'm not happy that Resident Evil Village has DLC. But I guess that's a DLC conversation. But this game started the DLC era of Resident Evil. So thank you for watching. I appreciate it. I don't know if we're going to tackle RE6 next. Obviously after Lost and Nightmares DLC. I don't know if we're going to tackle RE6 next or if we're going to tackle Revelations next. Or we might go all the way back and tackle RE0 or Resident Evil Survivor. I don't know yet. Kind of just doing these as I go through them. But I will tell you, I'll see you guys in the next video, and happy gaming.